Hi, I'm political analyst and Citizen Voice President Gary Dietrich, helping you make sense now out of Proposition 32, something that's already had a lot of debate here in California and undoubtedly will have a lot more between now and Election Day on November 6th. This one deals with restrictions on campaign contributions, and especially those that come from workers' automatic deductions from their paychecks. What would this do? Well, quite simply, prohibit unions and corporations from making automatic deductions from workers' paychecks to go to political campaign purposes, and specifically prohibit them from making contributions to candidate committees or those affiliated with a candidate. Helping us make sense out of that today is John Kabatek, representing the Yes on Prop 32 side. He's with the National Federation of Independent Businesses. And Philip Ong, representing the No on 32 side. He's with Common Cause. Gentlemen, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
John, let's start with you. Why do we need Prop 32?
Well, you know what? One of the things that we hear from our members, and we serve about 20,000 small and independent business owners. We are the non-partisan organization serving small businesses. And what we're hearing from small business owners and frankly voters up and down the state, a couple things. They're frankly worried about what tomorrow will bring, understandably, and they're frustrated. They're frustrated with a government, a California government that's got gridlock, politicians who are listening to special interests and frankly not to the voters they represent, and things just not getting done. I think we've seen with the voters speaking up, we've seen redistricting reform, we've seen open primaries, and I think what we're finding with Proposition 32 is this is really the third leg of the stool. We're supporting it because this is the third leg of the stool of putting the power back in the hands of the voter and stopping special interests from having the control that they do, namely big unions and big corporations.
Okay. Philip, why no on 32?
Well, no on 32 because it's deceptive. We think it's a rotten fruit basket that's covered with sprinkles and covered with candy to make it look good. Common Cause is a reform group. We've been working on reform, like John said. We worked on redistricting. We've worked on term limits reform. We've worked on campaign finance reform. In fact, we're the foremost campaign finance group in California. And we look at this proposition, we said, yeah, this isn't real reform. This is fake reform. This is reform that is put together to attack middle-class workers like nurses and firefighters and police officers, and we thought, you know, if you want to work on campaign finance, let's work on campaign finance, but let's not go after a certain group of people.
Let's stay there for just a second because Common Cause has been around a long time, and people kind of associate you with reform. But let me ask you, you know, this issue of automatic mandatory deductions of workers' paychecks for political purposes has become quite an issue in the public. How would you folks, have you tried to address that? If it's not 32, how should this be done?
Well, you know, the automatic deductions, there are laws already in the books that says that somebody doesn't have to give to the political activities of a union, that you can give to the administrative activities of the union or the collective bargaining activities of a union, that your money that is deducted out of your paycheck doesn't necessarily have to go to political activities of that union. So workers have a choice in that, and the law has been longstanding in the state.
Okay, well then, John, how does this change that?
Well, actually, what's wonderful is that this actually mirrors a federal law that's been in place for more than 100 years and what 21 other states are doing across the nation, which is stopping big businesses, big corporations, and unions from contributing to candidates, putting that power back in the hands of the voter, of the actual workers. It's actually stopping the payroll deductions, as you said. That's making sure that the actual voter, the worker, has the say, not the big organization that represents them, and it stops pay to play. So this is a real game changer in ensuring that small business and all Californians have a voice. We were very thrilled to work with Phil and Common Cause on redistricting reform. There have been other great reforms. This is Californians waking up. Proposition 32 gives Californians a voice, not the special interests who are for too long dominated the capital.
Okay, I'm going to separate these two things out, you know, where the money goes once it's collected and then the collection of it itself. So let's go back to Philip's point of this notion of all people can already opt out of making political contributions. How would 32 change that then?
Well, what 32 would do is make sure that the actual employee of the union or the corporation actually has the ability to opt in. So this is giving the person the voice to be able to say, this is where my money should go. If I'm making the money, I should have a say in where that money is going.
Okay.
So this is about fairness, and it's really just about democracy.
So the difference is, as we say in the business, this is requiring an affirmative action on the part of the person to opt in as opposed to having to make a decision to opt out. Is that essentially what it is?
Absolutely.
Okay.
They can still do it with a credit card, a check, but this is for the Joe voter to say, this is my opportunity to have control over my dollar.
Yeah, and that's the important distinction about this thing about contributions, whether they're mandatory or not, is whether you have to say, I'm opting in, or whether you have to say, no, I don't want it, I got to get out. Philip, comment on that, will you?
Yeah, you know, and that's what we've realized about Proposition 32 is this is the one part, the deduction part, that's really dishonest and disingenuous, which is corporations don't use paycheck deductions to fund their political campaigns. They use stock money, they use general treasuries from stockholders, they use executive salaries. They never, almost never ever, especially in California, use paycheck deductions to fund political activities. And so really the only people who are using paycheck type activities are unions. And so that's why you have unions coming out against this, is because this is going after their livelihood, their ability to speak. And trust us, we want campaign finance reform, but we don't want it in a way that's going to silence the voice of an entire class of people.
Okay, so again, I'll just ask you this one more time before we get on to where the money actually goes. How would you address the public's concern about this notion that public employee unions, in particular in California, have really grown in their impact and their influence, some would say inordinately, compared to others in the state, and have done that really through this mandatory deduction, you know, with the opt-out provision, as you note, to the tune of tens of millions of dollars every election cycle.
That's right. You know, we have spoken out against the union power here in Sacramento, and you know, to a lot of them, they don't like that. But here's the thing: is we're defending them in this because we know that middle-class workers need a voice in their government, not the big corporations who are going to use super PACs and independent expenditures to get around the loopholes that are built into Proposition 32. And so what we want is for government to return back to the people as well, right? We want campaign finance reform, but again, we don't want it to a point that it's going to silence the voice of firefighters, cops, and nurses.
So if you've been taking on the unions here, what specifically could be done, if not 32, to address that?
Well, really what we could be done is you could have real finance reform, real campaign finance reform, not something like I said earlier, which is rotted fruit.
What would that look like?
Well, that would include all the bans that are in 32 minus the paycheck deduction part.
Okay. So you actually like, and I want to come back to John on this, you like this provision then of prohibiting, when this money is collected, be it from corporations or unions, prohibiting it from going directly to candidates or candidate-controlled committees.
Absolutely,
okay.
But there's one poison fruit in that, and that's the paycheck deduction
Okay,
part.
John, let's address that second piece then, this notion that this would prohibit unions and corporations from directly contributing to candidates and candidate-controlled committees. That sounds good, and many people think it's important. I want you to address that along with this independent expenditure problem that people say, well, now they're just going to take their money outside and spend it there.
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, what this will do is make sure that the voters in the districts that elect the people that they send to Sacramento will have that voice. In 2010 alone, 79% of the contributions that went to candidates for the legislature were actually from outside the districts that they are supposed to represent. So that means 21% of the voting population maybe got a little bit of support there, but the voters who send people to Sacramento were in the minority. It was the special interests who controlled the contributions. We saw actually big corporations, Gary, give $48 million in 2010 alone to candidates, and we saw unions give about 26 million, and that most of that outside of the district. This is returning the power to the actual voters, the baker, the mom and pop owner of an auto shop, and just the average voter.
Yeah.
Not the special interests.
Thanks, John. Before we get back to Philip on this, real quickly, how do you do it? And I know the Supreme Court's weighed in on this thing, but then how do you just keep this money from not just going into an independent expenditure committee and being used for essentially the same purpose?
Yeah. Well, this is California, and certainly, you know, the Supreme Court and the U.S. Constitution have spoken as it relates to those dollars and in terms of independent expenditures. What Proposition 32 does is actually control, to the extent of the law that we can here in California, this problem. And it really is a corruption problem. I think we're seeing too much money in and favors out. So what's going, Prop 32 goes to the extent of the law that it can here, and frankly, still make sure that everybody has a voice, whether it's independent expenditures or anything else.
Well, certainly there's no question that every single poll you see nationally or statewide says money in politics, something people are very concerned about. Philip, so essentially you have agreement on this, that the dollars, however collected, should not be going directly to candidates or to candidate-controlled committees. You guys can agree on that point.
Absolutely, but we think, again, the biggest loophole is these super PACs and these independent expenditures that the corporations won't be affected by in Proposition 32. What you'll do is you'll turn off the faucet for union money and they can't spend any more money, but you'll allow corporations to unleash millions upon millions of dollars in independent expenditures.
So you feel essentially, as we get ready to wrap this up there, you feel essentially that it's too much of a burden to place on workers and unions to get an affirmative response from their workers, to get a, hey, we want you to opt in as opposed to the opt out. Is that really what what the crux of your opposition to this comes down to?
Well, the crux of our opposition is that it seems to be a very one-sided proposition against a group of people, and that's not fair campaign finance reform. And also the language, the way Proposition 32's language is written is we don't see a way for unions to work out how this voluntary process works. Do you have to ask every single paycheck? Do you have to ask every single time you want to give to a political donation? And so it is such a huge barrier that legally we just don't see how middle-class Americans can get over that hurdle and to participate in politics.
I know when it's been done in other places, typically it's a one-time deal where people can opt in, kind of ad infinitum, and they can opt back out if they want to. Right. But I don't know of anybody who's suggested that you're doing it at every paycheck or every campaign or every issue.
Proposition 32 doesn't specify that, and so we just don't know.
Okay, fair enough. All right, John, quickly respond to that, and then I'm going to give you guys both a chance to summarize your positions.
Sure. Well, I think that the heart of this, as we've talked about before, is giving the actual voter, the employee of a union, of a corporation, of just anybody in our communities, a chance to have that voice, have that ability to be the vote. Oftentimes people will not find that or corporations, their companies, or their union leadership is speaking for them. This is all about democracy, what made California and America great. So what Proposition 32 does is it restores that power back to the individual. If you can vote, you should be able to have your say over how you give your money.
Guys, we got asked to follow the money question. It's always important. Everybody wants to know who's behind these propositions, and frankly, they often can't get an answer to that. So let's just start on the yes side here. Where's your funding coming?
Well, we've got a lot of interested parties out there who are across the board who are very interested in reform. Again, the third leg of the stool here. Right. Many of who have been very involved in previous reforms. We have Charles Munger, who we've been able to work closely with, and Common Cause on the redistricting reform that we were fortunately able to see. We have Gloria Romero. While that's not money, she is actually a former Democratic leader and also heading up Democrats for Education Reform. But we're finding money coming in from and support across the board from the average taxpayers, small business owners, and really people who are growing more frustrated with Sacramento that is stifled.
Okay. Philip, on your side, no on 32 side?
Yeah, I'm going to be up front with the voters. A lot of this money comes from middle-class unions that represent millions upon millions of middle-class workers who see their livelihood and their ability to speak up being threatened. But I can tell you the people that are also opposed to this are some of the foremost reform groups who have always been honest with the California voter. You have Common Cause, the League of Women Voters, and California Clean Money Campaign. Okay. And these are the three foremost campaign finance groups saying that this is not real campaign finance reform.
So dollars from the unions, but like on the yes side, others in support as well. Okay, let's get a chance then for each of you. 30 seconds, your best shot on why yes or no. Let's start on the yes side with you, John.
Well, voters should vote for Proposition 32 because this is all about giving the voters, the citizens, a voice in California. For too long, we've seen unions, we've seen big corporations, special interests control the hallways at the Capitol. Californians have spoken up, redistricting reform, open primary. This is the third leg of the stool. Give Californians that voice. Vote yes on Proposition 32.
Hello?
And we'd say vote no on Proposition 32 simply because all it does is exacerbate the problem of independent expenditures and super PACs. You will see corporations spend more money in campaigns if Proposition 32 passes, which we hope it doesn't, because this has nothing to do with corporations. It doesn't limit a corporation's power to spend in politics, and that's why we think you should vote no. Okay,
well, money in politics, my friends. That has been a discussion that's been going on for a long time. And it seems like it's growing, not only at the state level, but nationally. People are concerned about that. And Prop 32 this fall on your California November ballot, an opportunity to weigh in on that, yes or no. We remind you that registering to vote and making your voice heard on November 6th, exceedingly important. There's some very major issues, including this one, you'll have a chance to make your voice heard on. And remember, citizenvoice.org, we're here to help.